Let's start doing this.
All right.
So I'm Eddie and you're Tim.
That is correct.
And we're just going to talk about some stuff regarding money and finances.
Oh man, that was an engaging intro right there.
That was an engaging intro. So what are we drinking today? What's the drink of?
Let's see. So this is out of your fridge. We have Austin East Cider's Watermelon Cider.
Watermelon cider, a manly drink. Maybe later we can do bourbon. All right. So what are we talking about here? What?
Yeah. So we're trying to get this. We're thinking about a few different things to talk about, and one of the things we hear a lot is that millennials are really bad at saving money. I feel like maybe once every month you hear something, right? Once a month you hear something like millennials are spending too much money on avocado toast.
That's true.
And not enough money on, I don't know, their 401k or something like that. And so we wanted to kind of start looking at that and really see what people are saying about that and just give our take on it.
So what are these articles saying a millennial is? I feel like you made a good point earlier about something where you work. I've seen most articles 1981 to 1996 as a millennial.
Yeah, at work we do 92 to 97. I've seen
82 to 97, right?
Excuse me, 82 to 97. You're correct. It's just everybody has a slightly different definition for it, and there's lots of studies that we don't need to get into, and it just ends up being about the same anyways.
So this article right here from Newsmax, and you can always tell that a website is respectable by the number of ads that it runs. So 1, 2, 3. Anyway, so it's Newsmax Finance, the top 5 millennial money mistakes. Wow, this will be fun.
It'll be a lot of fun. Yeah, all right. So the first one that they got is failure to budget. Eddie, what's your take on that?
Failure to budget. I mean, 99% of people, a statistic I pulled out of my butt, I'm willing to speculate that don't have a sort of written out budget, And I mean, it's so easy to $10 here, $10 there, and if you don't have any sort of control.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say budgeting in general. I'd be interested to see some of the numbers that say this is specifically a millennial problem of failure to budget, because I would have expected that to be just across the board. But just, kind of go to your idea about these small purchases. I mean, we were talking about how much money I spend on coffee, and $5.50 a day for an entire year is $2,000 a year. So, I mean, just kind of put that in perspective, right? Quick maths, exactly.
So I'm reading, so failure to budget, so this is what part of this article says, failing to pay yourself first and build an adequate emergency fund leaves you in a reactionary position as opposed to financial control. So just out of the blue, having an emergency fund. Do you have an emergency fund? Is that something that you think our generation or really any generation was struggling with?
Yeah, well, okay, so a couple of things there. I think one of the things, I know we're a little critical of this first point, but it's good advice. And everybody should have it. And you asked me if I have one, the answer is yes. I do have 6 months worth of savings saved up. I heard a stat, what was it, like maybe 6 months ago, that 60% of households, if they experience an unexpected $400 expense, would have to either borrow or sell something to pay for it. And just along those lines, you just kind of feel for those people, because that's real stressful if you don't have that kind of money to pay for an unexpected expense.
Yes, I was about to bring that stat up. I'll have to put it in the description, but 7 out of 10 people in the U.S. are supposedly living paycheck to paycheck.
Sure.
So not having an emergency fund and having an emergency situation is gonna set you back. Which brings us to point number 2. Good transition there. Credit cards gone wild. What can you tell me about credit cards? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so there's definitely people who spend too much, right? You have people who run up credit card bills, make only their minimum payments. They're definitely not using it right. My personal take on it is that credit cards aren't inherently bad, but can be used wrong. And if you don't pay it off every month, it will be very expensive to have.
Well, a credit card is a tool, and just much like any other, tool, hammer, whatever you might be using. If you know what you're doing, if you know how to use that tool, it's going to work out. If you and I, if I know how to build a deck and I have just a simple hammer, but you don't know how to build a deck and you have the best hammer in the world, something tells me I'm still going to do a better job. So essentially, with credit cards, it's tough. I mean, you see all these examples of only paying the minimum payment. On $2,000, you end up paying $13,000.
Exactly, yeah. And they have this stat here that credit cards with an average rate of 19.24%. Now, 19.24%. Can you give me some perspective on what that means in terms of dollars?
I feel like there's this big misconception with that, where people think that if you owe $1,000 on a credit card, and that's your bill, that if your interest rate's at 19%, that it's going to add $190 that you're going to pay extra, and that's just completely not true. What essentially happens on most credit cards is you owe $1,000 for that month, and 19% is $190, but they divide that by 12 because there's 12 months. So that's the percentage you pay in the year. So do the quick math: 190 divided by 12, like $17. So that next month, on that credit card bill of $1,000, it would add about $17 in interest.
Yeah, actually, 19.24% is actually lower than I might expect it to be.
You usually hear about 24, 25%.
That's not uncommon, even for people with good credit. Now, people with bad credit, I mean, it can go really, really high. I don't have the stats in terms of, I don't have the studies in front of me, but I would have expected that number to be higher.
Point number 3. Tell me about point number 3 here.
Student loan debt. Now, this is an interesting one. So the number that they have here is that there is 1.5 trillion of outstanding student loans. I'm going to venture a guess that that's majority millennial debt, right? Because you hear these different stories about college expenses increasing like crazy.
Yeah, no, for sure. Again, we could talk about this specific subject for hours. I mean, how it's a financial burden, how it's and all that. In terms of it being a mistake, I mean, again, we could just debate that and talk about that for hours.
Sure.
Is it a mistake, to go into certain amounts of debt to get a college degree? In some instances, yes. In some instances, no. So that's a good one. So how do we? What's the your overall take on that? How do we make that not be a quote unquote millennial financial mistake going forward?
So honestly, my take on that is that personal finance is criminally undertaught in school. And by criminally undertaught, I mean not at all. The only thing I ever learned in school about personal finance was how to fill out a check. And I can count on my hands how many times I've filled out a check.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're 17, 18, trying to go to the school you dream of going, and you hear, it's going to add $30,000 in student loan. I mean, do most 17, 18-year-olds even understand what that means?
You have no clue. You have absolutely no clue. And in fact, it's almost the opposite, where all you hear, all the advice you get is your guidance counselors, your teachers, your parents saying that the key to financial success is for you to go into this debt and don't worry about it because you'll have a better job on the other side. And that's all well and good until you get into that and you realize sometimes those expenses have increased so much that it takes forever to pay it off.
1.5 trillion, if you divide it by the number of people in the U.S. who have student loans,
gotcha.
It's about 35,000. 30 to 35,000 is the average right now.
That's a BMW.
That's it.
That's a low-end BMW.
That is a BMW. Get a BMW instead. Tim is saying. So, house rich, cash poor. I guess what this point's trying to get to is that a big millennial mistake is, for for those that actually buy homes, that a lot of them, just want to get into this home and essentially have this huge payments, and they have no cash, no money left for anything else.
Yeah. And this is actually this is a really interesting point. I hadn't considered this one prior to reading this article as a big millennial issue. In general, the millennial issue I hear is that houses have gotten so expensive that people can't buy them. They're paying off their student loans first, they're working, and then buying a house much later.
Well, that could also be a part of it as well. I mean, if we do have all this student loan and all this credit card debt, and then somehow you get to this house payment that they tell you is the max that you can get, well, now you have that and all those expenses, plus your student loan payments that maybe are in forbearance or come due later on, your credit card payments, the credit card debt that comes with owning a home on average. It's crazy. Yeah,
no, I think you're absolutely right. Just the other two things, or the other things we talked about, credit cards and student loan debt, really go into being cash poor, and in fact, budgeting really goes into that as well.
Yeah. Don't overextend yourself.
This is true.
When you're buying a house, when you're doing anything.
And like just one quick point there is when you buy a house, people say it's like a great investment, and that's not necessarily wrong, but there are a lot of costs that you don't necessarily think of. So if you don't have that emergency fund saved up, what happens if your AC goes out? What happens if you have to replace your water heater? You have thousands of dollars worth of expenses. And we mentioned that stat earlier that you said 70% of people were living paycheck to paycheck. Well, could you afford $5,000 if you're living paycheck to paycheck? And my guess is no.
The last sort of mistake is it says meeting the Joneses. So just real quick, if keeping up with the Joneses is you can Google it, but essentially, is seeing what your neighbors, literally and figuratively mostly, have and how they're living sort of affects the way you live, and you see somebody has a house, you see your best friend has a nice car, and I'm like, oh, well, that's what I want. But according to this article, the biggest mistake is meeting them, or essentially, seeing what those people have, not really realizing the maybe the amounts of debts or that they might have, but you see all the good stuff, and that maybe in a way sort of makes you feel like you don't have enough, or you need to aspire to get more.
No, for sure. And I think this is another thing that really impacts all generations, but specifically millennials, because of the social media era. And you see what everybody has, and everybody's flexing with their latest vacation, their newest car, whatever it is they did, and it becomes very easy to want those things. And even if you're really not trying to compare yourself to those people, you see people having fun with these experiences, or you see people enjoying these new things that they bought. And some part of you is going to want to do that. I think that's human behavior. That's normal human behavior. And that's not necessarily something we're really prepared for.
Right.
That's not necessarily something that we're really taught too much in school.
Right.
In terms of how to deal with that and how to live within your budget, and not necessarily try to go too much and overextend yourself on some of these experiences.
Now, I know I haven't said this at all today, but this is probably a subject that we could make a whole entire video on, or have a whole discussion on. But no, absolutely. So let me ask you this. Kind of going over these 5 millennial mistakes by the wonderfully written article by Newsmax. Your main point, your sort of main point, or advice, quick sort of advice that may cover some or all of these points.
For sure. If there's something that you can take away from this, I think one is recognizing that maybe you weren't taught a lot of this stuff, but it's not too late to start. And then all this stuff, none of the things we talked about are super difficult. Saving money, all it takes is just willpower, which granted I'm making it sound easier than it actually is, but it's doable, right? Creating a budget can be emotionally taxing once you start diving into how you spend your money. We joked about my caffeine addiction earlier. But once you start doing that, you start building up good habits. And when you start building up good habits, like with a budget, things start to work themselves out. If you spend your money wisely, your credit cards won't be so wild. Your student loan debt, you'll start making some progress on that. You might spend too much on your house, but hopefully you'll be at a point where you can have enough of an emergency fund where you'll be okay. right? And then when it comes to meeting with the Joneses, I'm a big proponent of having some enjoyment in terms of just you only live one life, and so it's okay to have a little bit of fun. But if you're good with your money, it becomes, you end up making better decisions with it. Absolutely. And so again, yes, we're not necessarily starting in a good spot, but all of it is very doable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, Tim, anything else you have to say perhaps about the drink of the day? Did you like it?
It was good, yeah.
Maybe we can do shots later. All right, well, that's
Signing
it.
off.